Welcome back. We're here for I think this is our third, maybe fourth, losing track, of session of Job. We're going to begin as we usually do and pray, so let us pray. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the warming weather, at least around here. We thank you for gathering us and being with us to explore your word and its meaning in our lives. We especially pray for those who cannot be with us, especially Judy. We ask that you offer them comfort and knowledge of your presence with them. We also pray for our world as we struggle with the challenges that we face. Currently, we have our deep concerns and prayers about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the way it's impacting the world around it. But also all of those who are struggling or suffering in our world that we often forget to remember in the midst of what is most in front of us. Especially the wars and armed conflicts in Afghanistan and Myanmar, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Syria, South Sudan, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Chad, Iraq, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, and 100 other countries that we often forget in the midst of what is most present to us. Be with those who are suffering the consequences of war and conflict, of violence and destruction, and help those who can to meet the needs of those who suffer. We pray all this in your holy name. Amen. I had somebody recently lift up a reminder of the civil war in Ethiopia. And I thought to myself, that's right, there are a lot more conflicts going on in the world than just the Ukraine. And so I went looking, and that took me down quite the rabbit hole. We are in the middle of a world war. It's just that Europe and the United States aren't involved.
How do you mean?
It's almost every country in the world is engaged in war right now.
Isn't most of that civil war?
Some of it, but
So when I think of World War, I think of multiple nations in conflict with multiple other nations.
well,
I think of it as a nation-based conflict.
right. So right now, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are engaged in a war. Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan are engaged in war. In addition to Ethiopia's civil war, Ukraine and Russia. All of those are major conflicts that involve more than 10,000 deaths so far.
Wow.
Somalia and Kenya are engaged in a war. Niger, Cameroon, and Chad.
Somalia and Kenya are in a war?
Well, armed conflict. I mean, it's hard when you start looking around Africa. It's the way armed conflict happens is different than the Western world. So, I mean, who controls the power there is complicated. So when we look at a lot of what's going on in Africa, and that is one of the places where a lot of the armed conflicts are happening, it's often between rival tribes, warlords, and governments. Sometimes between multiple governments. It's really much more problematic because power is not as centralized in Africa as it is in the Western world. So the individuals have a lot more power to make war outside of the powers of the government. So, but Colombia and Venezuela, at some point here, well, Rwanda, I mean, remember in the 90s when we were so deeply worried about Rwanda? That never ended. It's still going on.
The Tutsis and the Tutsis.
Yeah, so,
Or Tutus.
but yeah, that conflict is not limited to Rwanda. That conflict extends well beyond the territorial borders of Rwanda, sometimes into Uganda and sometimes into Burundi. So, yeah, that's a conflict that's been going on for 30, 40 years. And we made a big deal out of it when there was a major motion picture about it. And then we just forgot. So.
You know, it's really interesting because, you know, I lived in the center of Africa for a couple months. Yeah. And
whereabouts?
In eastern Tanzania.
Okay.
Or western Tanzania, I'm sorry. I was over close to the Ugandan border. And those people are just so incredibly gentle. I mean, they're just incredibly gentle people. And I was in Tanzania in a town size of Dixon, actually, most of the time. But I also traveled to Uganda and to Kenya. And it was true wherever you went. They were just incredibly friendly, incredibly at peace with their lot in life, and just genuinely nice people.
Which reminds me, if anybody's interested, our women's group, Welka, here is going to have a guest speaker coming up soon, who's spent a significant amount of time in Tanzania and is going to do a presentation. I'm sure they'd be happy to have other people come and visit for it, so if you're interested, talk to Marge Asplund. She's...
When is that?
I don't recall.
It's going to be
March.
towards the end of
May?
April. I think it's the 20th of April.
And what group is sponsoring?
It's Welka.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Good.
I'm guessing that even though it's a women's group, if there were men who wanted to come to watch the
I'm sure anybody
presentation.
can come. There's no reason why they can't.
Yeah, we've done quite a bit working with the groups in the ELCA who advocate for Tanzania and do work over there, especially with the hospital system there. So yeah. All right, let's dive back into Job. We've made it through round one of his friends. Ding, 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 time for round two. Can we get a volunteer reader to be Eliphaz?
15?
Yep.
Okay, well. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered, should a wise man answer with windy knowledge, and fill himself with the east wind? Should he argue in unprofitable talk, or in words with which he can do no good? But you are doing away with the fear of God, and hindering meditation before God. For your iniquity teaches your mouth, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, and not I. Your own lips testify against you. Are you the first man that was born, or were you brought forth before the hills? Have you listened in counsel of God, and do you limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? What do you understand that is not clear to us? Both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, older than your father. Are the consolations of God too small for you, or the word that deals gently with you? Why does your heart carry you away, and why do your eyes flash, that you turn your spirit against God, and let such words go out of your mouth? What is man that he can be clean, or he that is born of a woman, that he can be righteous? Behold, God puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not clean in his sight. How much less one who is abominable and corrupt, a man who drinks iniquity like water? I will show you, hear me, and what I have seen I will declare. What wise men have told and their fathers have not hidden, to whom alone the land was given, and no stranger passed among them. The wicked man writhes in pain all his days, through all the years that are laid upon for the ruthless. Terrifying sounds are in his ears, In prosperity, the destroyer will come upon him. He does not believe that he will return out of darkness, and he is destined for the sword. He wanders abroad for bread, saying, "Where is it?" And he knows that a day of darkness is ready at his hand. Distress and anguish terrify him. They prevail against him like a king prepared for battle. Because he has stretched forth his hand against God and bids defiance to the Almighty, running stubbornly against him with a thick bossed shield, because he has covered his face with his fat, and gathered a fat upon his loins. And he has lived in desolate cities, in houses which no man should inhabit, which were destined to become heaps of ruins. He will not be rich, and his wealth will not endure, nor will he strike root in the earth. He will not escape from darkness, the flame will dry up his shoots, and his blossom will be swept away by the wind. Let him not trust in emptiness, deceiving himself, for emptiness will be his recompense. It will be paid in full before his time, and his branch will not be green. He will shake off his unripe grape like the vine, and cast off his blossom like the olive tree. For the company of the godless is barren, and the fire consumes the tents of bribery. They conceive mischief and bring forth evil, and their heart prepares deceit.
Thank you. Okay. What's Eliphaz's argument? It's two parts. The first 16 verses are basically, what do you know? Right? I mean, he actually says something like that. What do you know that we don't? Somewhere in there.
9.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, what do you know that we do not know? What do you understand that is not clear to us? That's sort of the straightforward. And then the rest of it is summarized in 17. I'll show you. Listen to me. I have seen what I will declare, that what the sages have told, right? So, you don't know anything because you're talking from your own perspective. I know stuff because I'm going to tell you what the sages say, right? And what do they say? Well, verse 20, this is who the wicked are. And then everything after that is, this is what's going to happen to the wicked, and this is who they are, and this is what God's going to do, and all that. So that's kind of the thrust of the
Sure,
argument.
because you're suffering, you're wicked.
Right, and that's the implication, is that, well, since this is what the sages say will happen to the wicked, and it's happening to you, you must be wicked. You can't deny it. So there's a couple interesting things here. Verse 2, should the wise answer with windy knowledge, unseeable, blown around implication, and fill themselves with the east wind. Now, so this is an interesting. We don't use east and west the way they do in Scripture. East and west are both directions and metaphors for time. The east is the future, and the west is the past. In Hebrew language, in Hebrew poetry. So in other words, I mean, and this sets up in contrast. 2 is set up in contrast with 17. He's saying, you're talking about you're talking from this windy knowledge, right? You're filled with futuristic thoughts. You're filled with ideas that are not rooted in the past. But let me tell you what those sages back then said. There is, in the ancient world, there is a strong emphasis on the idea that what has temporal length, what has roots that go back a long way in time, is worthwhile. And that which is short-lived or new has very little value. This is one of the big fights that Christianity has its first few hundred years, is that it gets blown off as just this new upstart religion like all those others that come and go and just fade away in time. And so Christianity has a hard time claiming any roots in the Greco-Roman world. And so some of what it does in early Christian history is try to claim roots in Judaism and sometimes in Greek philosophy. Paul, for example, who is in many ways a Jewish scholar in his time, also relies heavily on Greek philosophy in explaining Christianity because it appeals to people to be connected to those deeper roots. We still do this to some degree today. We have a strong emphasis on preserving the past. We preserve tradition. But we also now, in our modern world, have, and I think we owe to some degree the Renaissance a bit for that. We have shifted a bit to also appreciating new ideas, new thoughts, and futuristic ideas. But that was getting to the point now where we can actually look and say, what's the future going to look like, and how are we going to get there? Is been a hard-fought battle that's taken us 600-700 years to get to a point where you can actually talk about the future in a positive way, intellectually about the future. Verse 4 is also very interesting. So this might speak a little bit to what's going on in here. But you're doing away with the fear of God, Eliphaz says. So this is an intriguing thing, and it's funny that we crossed this path today because I was wrestling with this. I now want to do a biblical search and study where the fear of God shows up, because it occurred to me that every reference I can think of to the fear of God is a human being talking to another human being. But every time we encounter, the Scripture tells the story of an encounter with a divine being, what's the number one thing they say almost every time, and it's the first thing out of their mouths?
Do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. So you have a bunch of humans running around saying, let me tell you about God. You need to fear God. And then the angels show up, and the first thing they say is, don't be afraid. Isn't that a little interesting? Like, sometimes I wonder if, and definitely with the Hebrew Bible, there's more truth to this there. If what's preserved is a conversation, not an instruction manual or a rule, right? It's not that maybe in our scriptures is not the here's how it has to be, this is what God demands, but rather here's the conversation that's being had around our relationship with God. And every once in a while, God directly interjects and says, okay, you're getting a little too far off the deep end here. Because there are some dilemmas if we take Scripture as a whole. I mean, for example,
is the whole theme of the Old Testament you should cower before God?
Well, so you have to remember that the Hebrew Bible is written over a period of about 1,600 years.
But is the theme that you need to be afraid of God, or fear God, or cower before God, is that the basis of the Old Testament?
Is there one theme? Is there a theme? The theme of the Bible is God.
Yeah.
That's it. Period. God. Period. That's the theme of the Bible. Now, what else does it say? It depends on which book you're reading. I think our effort to put a singular theme to the Bible, or even to the Old and New Testament, is kind of problematic.
But like you said, fear of God is prevalent throughout.
Well,
but when I think back on my theology, I'm sure that I learned about the fear of God in Sunday school and probably in confirmation and stuff. But I was thinking back, I can't think of when I've felt the fear of God. I may never have felt the fear of God.
Well, because we were brought up with the song "Jesus Loves Me," so
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and that
there's some
comes
truth in
from
that.
first day in Sunday school.
It's the other side of that is also the context of a lot of the Hebrew Bible is in the midst of tragedy and suffering. And most cultures in which Christians can say, honestly, yes, I understand what the fear of God is, are cultures that are living under oppression or suffering. So, is it that we in much of the Western world struggle to understand the concept of fear in God? Is that rooted in what we're teaching or how we're reading our Bibles, or is that rooted in our culture and the advantageous conditions in which we live?
I heard an interesting report on the war last night. I forget what station I was watching, but this reporter said he was standing somewhere around Mariupol or whatever, and he's saying that the world has never seen this kind of destruction with their sophisticated missiles and all that. They've never ever seen this destruction. Obviously, wasn't really, the history didn't go back before 1950.
Right.
And certainly doesn't know anything about Alexander the Great or any of those people.
Well, I mean, so interestingly enough, Alexander the Great didn't wreak all that much destruction. The really fascinating, no, you got to read the military history of Alexander the Great and the Macedonian army. So first off, this is a big tangent. I'll try to keep it short. So the first thing is Alexander the Great actually often fought battles with a smaller army than his opponents. The reason that Alexander the Great was so successful as a military complex was largely due to Aristotle, who had taught him the concept of the phalanx. And the phalanx was basically the idea of you give everybody a spear and a giant shield, and then you line them up in an organized pattern so that basically you have a walking tank. And you just walk your tank forward. And then all you got to do is figure out how to protect your flanks. And then you can just walk over armies that are 3, 4, 10 times the size of your own.
But he left whole cities leveled and depopulated.
There are some...
I've read a fair amount of Alexander the Great, and what I've read is different than what you're talking about.
So the way in which Alexander the Great leveled cities, by which none of the buildings are actually...
Burned them.
Well, sometimes. But the cities were depopulated because they were absorbed into the Greek army over time as they marched, which was common practice for the time. But, I mean, you want to talk about devastation from that time period. Look at what the Persians do under Xerxes.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of par for the course for the culture. The funny thing is, Alexander the Great is often lifted up as this great example, whereas I believe it's Genghis Khan gets a very negative reputation. And really one of the things Genghis Khan did was he was one of the world's first feminists. He would go in and he would conquer a city, and he would marry one of the important women in the city and then put them in charge of running the city. And so he left a wake of female rulers behind him who were his wives and served him, but ultimately he left the cities intact, which was contrary to common characteristic of the time. But that was because the Mongols had huge resources of horses, and their advantage was in speed, not large army establishment. Anyway, way off topic. But no, it does raise the interesting question, though, of verse 4. What is our relationship with God and the idea of fearing God? Because Eliphaz, who is a proponent of traditional wisdom, says you should fear God. And Job, by your arguments, you seem to be suggesting that we should not fear God. So it's intriguing that this debate is coming up here in this I mean, a lot of, in a broader sense, what the book of Job is arguing is the contrast between traditional wisdom and and continuing education, ongoing learning, right? Being willing to challenge and question the prevailing wisdom of the time. And it comes into topics like this, like, do we fear God? Is God good even? Is God just? Or more particularly, are God's punishments just? Is really more Job's argument. Any other thoughts, questions about in that chapter? What's Job got to say about this?
I'll read it. Then Job answered, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall windy words have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If you were in my place, I could join words together against you and shake my head at you. I could strengthen you with my mouth, and the solace of my lips would assuage your pain. If I speak, my pain is not assuaged, for I forbear how much of it leaves me. Surely now God has worn me out. He has made desolate all my company, and he has shriveled me up, which is a witness against me. And my leanness has risen up against me. It testifies to my face. He has torn me in his wrath and hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. Men have gaped at me with their mouth. They have struck me insolently upon the cheek. They mass themselves together against me. God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. I was at ease, and he broke me asunder. He seized me by the neck and dashed me to pieces. He set me up as his target. His archers surround me. He slashes open my kidneys and does not spare. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with breach upon breach. He runs upon me like a warrior. I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin and have laid my strength in the dust. My face is red with weeping, and on my eyelids is deep darkness. Although there is no violence in my hands, and my prayer is pure. O earth, cover not my blood, and let my cry find no resting place. Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he that vouches for me is on high. My friends scorn me. My eye pours out tears to God, that he would maintain the right of a man with God, like that of a man with his neighbor. For when a few years have come, I shall go the way whence I shall not return.
Okay. So Job's answer is,
God's not nice to me.
yeah, well, kinda. I mean, he starts out with, you guys are bad friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, if our roles were reversed, I could be a jerk like you. Is basically what he's saying. He even goes to the point of being sarcastic. I could encourage you with my mouth, and the solace of my lips would assuage your pain. Right? Total sarcasm. And we know it's sarcasm because his very next line is, if I speak, my pain is not assuaged. Right? So, it's not often you get clear sarcasm in the written word. But here's a good example. But yeah, then he goes on to talk about the pain that he is suffering. 15, 16, 17 is intriguing because, of course, what his friends are pointing out, the traditional wisdom says you've done something wrong, so you need to do penance. You need to admit your fault, right? So he answers, I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin. Well, traditionally, wearing sackcloth is a form of penance in this culture. I have laid my strength in the dust. Rolling in the dust is a form of penance in this culture. So not only, he hasn't just put on sackcloth and rolled in the dust, he has sewn it to his skin, and he's even left his strength in the dust. So he's saying, not only am I doing penance, I'm doing double penance. I'm doing an extreme version of penance. And then 17, I'm doing all this even though there is no violence in my hands, and my prayer is pure. Intriguingly enough, so then he turns and speaks to God. Well, he speaks of God. And 19 is interesting because he says, even now, in fact, my witness is in heaven, and he that vouches for me is on high. Right? That's God. He's saying, God knows that I'm innocent. Which is intriguing because we know the context of the story, that God does know that Job is innocent. So Job is reaffirming what we already know. But yeah, that's the thrust of his response. But he's going to keep going for a bit. 17?
I'll do it.
Okay.
My spirit is broken, my days are cut short, the grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me, my eyes must dwell on their hostility. Give me, O God, the pledge you demand. Who else will put up security for me? You have closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. If anyone denounces their friends for reward, the eyes of their children will fail. God has made me a byword to everyone, a man in whose face people spit. My eyes have grown dim with grief. My whole frame is but a shadow. The upright are appalled at this. The innocent are aroused against the ungodly. Nevertheless, the righteous will hold to their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. But come on, all of you, try again. I will not find a wise man among you. My days have passed, my plans are shattered, yet the desires of my heart turn night into day. In the face of the darkness, light is near. If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in the realms of darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother, my sister, when there is my hope, where then is my hope? Who can see any hope for me? Will it go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together into the dust?
Okay. Yeah. Pretty depressing language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Verse 8, 9, maybe 10. We got something similar in the previous chapter in 11. God gives me up to the ungodly, right? And here he says, the upright are appalled at this. The innocent stir themselves up against the godless. This is, he's kind of making the argument that if this is who God is, if your prevailing wisdom is correct, it's driving people away from God. Because the righteous and the innocent are the ones who are turned away by what's going on. And there are those in our culture today who would say the same is true. They look at what happens in the world of religion and they say, how can that be what God wants? The conflicts we have between churches, the criminal behavior that's protected or justified by institutions in churches, sometimes the politics that churches lift up are problematic to people. And we have a whole movement, a whole humanist movement that says it's possible, not only is it possible to be good without religion, but maybe it's even easier to be good without religion. That's a very critical claim. And if we pick and choose examples from church history, even modern church history, you can find justification for those arguments. And that's kind of what Job is alluding to here, is Eliphaz and his friends are saying, this is what our religion teaches us, this is what our traditions and our sages have taught us, this is who God is. And Job is saying, if that's true, why does anybody worship God? Right? Because God's just handing the good people over to the godless. It's kind of a powerful argument to find inside the Bible, isn't it? So here is another interesting, this is just sort of a side note. The very last verse of this, I don't remember, you've got a paraphrase, so I don't remember how it's worded, but what I have is, will it go down to the bars of Sheol? We get some imagery of a gate in the place of death, which is incredibly rare. Usually Sheol is just under the surface of the ground. It is just down there somewhere. Right? And it's neither heaven nor hell, it's just the place of the dead. But here, Sheol has bars, which seems to imply a fence or a gate. And we don't really see that imagery elsewhere until modern Christianity. Well, not modern Christianity, until some point in the early Christian movement. Okay, how are we doing for time? We're almost at time, aren't we? Yeah. What? Am I misreading?
35.
Oh, sorry. I need new glasses. I need new glasses, and that font is really small. I was going to say it felt a little early. Okay, so if Eliphaz's arguments aren't good enough, let's see what Bildad has to say.
All right. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered, how long will you hunt for words? Consider, and then we shall speak. Why are we counted as cattle? Why are we stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in your anger, shall the earth be forsaken because of you? Or the rock be removed out of its place? Surely the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of their fire does not shine. The light is dark in their tent, and the lamp above them is put out. Their strong steps are shortened, and their own schemes throw them down. For they are thrust into a net by their own feet, and they walk into a pitfall. A trap seizes them by the heel, a snare lays hold of them. A rope is hid for them in the ground, a trap for them in the path. Terrors frighten them on every side, and chase them at their heels. Their strength is consumed by hunger, and calamity is ready for their stumbling. By disease their skin is consumed. The firstborn of death consumes their limbs. They are torn from the tent in which they trusted, and are brought to the king of terrors. In their tents nothing remains. Sulfur is scattered upon their habitations. Their roots dry up beneath, and their branches wither above. Their memory perishes from the earth. They have no name in the street. They are thrust from light into darkness and driven out of the world. They have no offspring or descendant among their people, and no survivor where they used to live. They of the west are appalled at their fate, and horror seizes those of the east. Surely such are the dwellings of the ungodly. Such is the place of those who do not know God.
Okay. So I'm gonna give Bildad a nickname for the Star Wars fans out there. Bildad is the Admiral Akbar of his. Oh, good. I'm glad that reference is not dead yet. Yeah, I mean that's his. When he gets into the talk about about who the wicked are, right? His argument is basically it's a trap. He goes on a rather lengthy dissertation on how you're being tricked, my good friend Job. You're falling into the trap. that wicked people fall into all the time. That's the main thrust of his argument. It's intriguing though how he starts out because, and this gets me really wondering about what kind of friends these are, because they're really awful to each other. But he starts out asking, why are you treating us like animals, like cattle, right? Are we stupid in your sight? Which is intriguing because this is, if you get into a lot of discussions or debates, eventually somebody throws that argument out, right? Like what, you think I'm stupid?
Yeah.
Like, that's not even an argument. Oftentimes it's the argument thrown against somebody who actually has done the research or has the knowledge or experience or whatever, the actual pedigree to explain the situation. What, do you think I'm stupid? But the dilemma is the same. Job's not necessarily saying he's stupid. He's saying my friends are focused on this past wisdom, and Job is contending with that. Of course, they don't come right out and say that because they're trying to present this case as the discussion as a story. It's a really fascinating way to have this conversation. And it is illustrated a little bit here. Remember how we talked about the West? The West represents the past, and the East the future. And so you notice at the end we get this metaphor again. They of the West, that is, those who follow the old traditions, right? They're appalled at the faith and horror seizes. Okay, so no, let me stop at faith. They're appalled at their fate, not their own fate, but the fate of the wicked, right? So the people who follow ancient wisdom are appalled at what happens to those who are wicked. Like, it's that bad. Horror seizes those in the East. So the people who think like you, Job, they look at what's happening to the wicked and they're terrified because it's coming for them, right? So this is the East-West debate. You get the East siders and the West siders. Pretty soon here they're going to start snapping and singing along. But it is. It's a debate between ancient wisdom versus modern knowledge. And that's the fight that's going on. They're going to keep alluding to this, or keep fighting this battle between them. Anything in particular jump out from the explanation from Bildad? Okay. So it's my turn. I get Job. Then Job answered, "How long will you torment me and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me." So that's interesting. We've only heard from them 5 times, right? Because it was, yeah, all 3 of them spoke once, and then Eliphaz and Bildad got to speak again. So 5 times, but he says 10. These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me, and are you not ashamed to wrong me? And even if it is true that I have erred, my error remains with me. If indeed you magnify yourselves against me and make my humiliation an argument against me, know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net around me. Even when I cry out, violence, I am not answered. I call aloud, but there is no justice. He has walled up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness upon my paths. He has stripped my glory from me and taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. He has uprooted my hope like a tree. He has kindled his wrath against me. and counts me as his adversary. His troops come on together. They have thrown up siege works against me and encamp around my tent. He has put my family far from me, and my acquaintances are wholly estranged from me. My relatives and my close friends have failed me. The guests in my house have forgotten me. My serving girls count me as a stranger. I have become an alien in their eyes. I call to my servant, but he gives me no answer. I must myself plead with him. My breath is repulsive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. Even young children despise me when I rise. They talk against me. All my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I love have turned against me. My bones cling to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me. Have pity on me, O you, my friends, for the hand of God has touched me. Why do you, like God, pursue me, never satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on a rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. If you say, how we will persecute him, and the root of the matter is found in him, be afraid of the sword, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, and that you may know there is a judgment. All right. Taken several very interesting twists here in this chapter. Right? He's reproaching his friends. Look, even if it's that horrible, even if I am wrong, even if I have done something bad, how horrible are you that you would punish me further than what I've already been punished, right? Again, you're terrible friends. This imagery right around the middle, 16, 17, 18, right around there, he's describing himself as if he's already dead, right? I'm repulsive to look at. My skin clings to my bones, so there's no muscle left. My breath is repulsive to my wife. I'm rotted. It's like I'm laying here dead. He's the Walking Dead. He's just barely alive. But intriguingly, he makes this turn in 25. I know that my Redeemer lives. We sing this song. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will, well, we say, raise me up. He will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I will see God. So, relatively early imagery of resurrection, or something to that nature. I mean, he is talking here, and this is not a, I'm going to die and go up to heaven and see God in my spiritual body in the spiritual place. He says, after my flesh is destroyed, in my flesh, I will see God. So, being fully reformed in the body. And yet that's I'm not sure that that's the prevailing theology yet in the world, in the Israelite world. I'd have to, it really, we have a fairly broad range upon when this is written, and in the earlier days of this, the idea of resurrection is almost non-existent. And in the latter days, it's barely catching on at all. And even by the time we get Jesus, at least 300, maybe 600 years later, he's still in the minority, talking about resurrection. So Job is very much in the minority here with his expressions. But he lifts God up in a very positive way here. And then finally in 28, he takes another interesting twist, because all this time he's been arguing against the prevailing wisdom. But then he goes on to say, you persecute me so much that the judgment's coming for you. In other words, you're wicked, so you're going to get punished. Now, I don't know that he's actually advocating for that traditional wisdom, so much as I think he's pursuing that same kind of thought as he did at the beginning of this chapter, at the beginning of this answer, which is, look at what's happening to me, and look at how awful you're being. Why would you be awful to somebody who's suffering? Of course, go ahead.
Could you discuss chapter 26 again?
Verse 26.
Yeah, verse 26.
And after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh.
Well, mine says then without my flesh.
Oh, that's interesting. Hang on, I got a note on here.
Mine says then from my flesh.
Mine says in my flesh.
Really?
Yeah.
And mine says without my flesh.
Yeah, it looks like there may be textual variants.
Well,
With
in my
my
flesh and without my flesh are opposites, are they
Right.
not?
Well, right, but if there's a textual variant, that means there are different ancient texts that say different things. So let me see if I can pull up the Hebrew.
Because when you were reading that, I thought, okay, so he's talking about his spirit being with God.
Sure. This is.
But and then you talk about how the resurrection, it was the whole body's lifted up.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up the Hebrew and take a look at it.
I've got a footnote in mine that kind of tries to explain it.
Does it? What does it say?
Well, it says, verse 26, from my flesh, Job insists that he will see God. The Hebrew of verse 26 is corrupt, perhaps as a result of an accident or a scribal polemics against the latter Jewish belief in the resurrection of the flesh. Whether or not Job expresses here a new faith in life beyond death, he no longer asks for a recognition of his innocence. The vision of God will be sufficient.
Yeah. Yep, nope, the Hebrew is and from my flesh.
That's what mine says.
Interesting. Yep. So,
Oh.
So, and from my flesh means without my flesh?
no, it means with it.
Yeah.
Like, if I yell at you from my car, I'm in my car. Or at least pretty darn close to it.
Mine says from, and then it's got another footnote, and then it says or without. So I guess that's what they're saying, that it's correct, because it's got two.
Yeah, I'm looking at the,
The meaning of the verse is uncertain.
right, there's a little bit of ambiguity. I'm looking at the Brown Driver Briggs, addressing of this word in Hebrew to see if there's anything, but there's nothing special. Yeah. So that's an intriguing passage. Without doing extensive research, I would argue that from my flesh suggests more of a bodily resurrection than a spiritual reality. There's nothing really around the text that clarifies it. whether Job is referring to a spiritual existence after death or a physical existence after death. Yeah, it's there's nothing to give us additional context. And I'm sure that Zophar's not going to respond to that. The key thrust of this is that he will have the opportunity to stand before God and be redeemed. And that's what Job's bigger concern is here. Interesting. Other thoughts, questions? Okay. I think I'm going to stop us there. Give you a chance to raise up anything else, because if we get to Zophar's statement, then we'll want to hear Job's reply. So
Okay.
we'll pause there and pick up at verse 20 next time. Anything else jumping out at you, or before we close?
I'm just fascinated by what the authors are, how this is presented. I mean, like I said last time, it's like a play. It is a play.
Okay, yeah, it is. It's written like one. And as I said, I have a friend who at one time wanted to argue that this is like a dark comedy, like meant to be portrayed. Okay, so I thought I had a last thought that it might be interesting to see what the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, that's what Jewish Publication Society, how they translated that passage. And verse 26 in the JPS, which modern day Judaism, I don't believe, well, no, I think, I can't remember if they believe in a bodily resurrection now, at least most of them. Verse 26, this, after my skin will have been peeled off, but I would behold God while still in my flesh. That's their translation. Of course, that doesn't necessarily help. I was thinking that they don't uphold a bodily resurrection, but actually they probably hold a stronger idea of the bodily resurrection than many Christians do, ironically. All right, we'll close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
give
Give
us
us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks for continuing to check us out. Come back next week, and we will see you then. Peace.